Good evening and welcome to the Aliens and Cowboys podcast. I'm your co-host Garrett. Tonight I'm sitting with Joe.
Hello everybody. Thanks for listening.
Nate can't be with us tonight. He's a little under the weather, but he's sending his notes for the evening. Tonight we're going to discuss the governmental breakdown of the galaxy of Star Wars and how they go from a republic to the Empire to either the New Republic or the First Order, whatever you'd prefer. This is going to be a discussion, not really so much as a debate. We're pretty much like-minded on a lot of these issues we've talked through. We are not going to break down all the movies piece by piece. We're going to assume that you have seen them. If not, spoilers are going to be ahead. So if you haven't seen them by now, that sucks to suck. We're going to take care of that. So starting off here, obviously, the number one thing is to determine how do we go from the Old Republic to the Empire. And we kind of sat around and kicked this idea around, and what we came up with was, two different things. Is it the fault of the Republic, or is it going to be more of just the conniving, the backstabbing of Palpatine that really makes that rise? And we're going to kind of break that down tonight for you guys and what we kind of think, and then we'll kind of have that debate, which we think has a bigger impact. So where we're going to start here is, obviously, we'll start with the opening scenes of The Phantom Menace. What we have set up is that the Trade Federation has a blockade of the planet Naboo, and they are planning to basically do an invasion. Unbeknownst to them, the Old Republic has sent ambassadors to do a negotiation with them. And these ambassadors are actually Jedi Knights, which the Trade Federation viceroys do not know. This is a little underhanded trick. Joe, what do you think? What's your opinion on the Republic sending ambassadors, Jedi's disguised as ambassadors?
Yeah, absolutely. I think right from the get-go, just from Newt Gunray's perspective, he's very clearly shocked that there are Jedi there. He has no anticipation that they are going to be the ones who's actually coming on behalf of the Senate to have this conversation with them. And obviously from there, he determines that he needs to take some pretty direct action to get rid of them and attempts to have them killed in that conference room scene as well. So.
Sure. And it's kind of one of those things where it's a really underhanded move, because if you're going to think about the Jedi showing up as negotiators, what possible argument would the Trade Federation be able to make that the Jedi would say, nope, you're right, and they would just leave,
exactly.
Right? Without physically forcing them, either by mind trick or by force, to actually pull back from this blockade. And that's kind of one of the first things is it's kind of the role which we'll debate in this, or discuss in this discussion here, is the role the Jedi play, the Jedi Council, their ineptitude, their failures as well are pretty glaring in the story. So obviously, like I said, it's kind of an underhanded trick that they do. Basically what happens from there is the negotiations obviously never take place. The Federation is dealing with Darth Sidious, who we would know as Palpatine, and basically what happens is the Jedi basically land on Naboo. They get Amidala. Why this is going on, the invasion of the planet starts, and basically it's up to Obi-Wan Kenobi and Obi-Wan Kenobi and Qui-Gon Jinn to protect Amidala. Basically, they, end all be all. They protect her. They end up going to Tatooine. They end up discovering, basically, Anakin Skywalker. We run into Darth Maul. We end up back in Naboo, where Palpatine obviously has some interesting choice words about the way the government operates and has been operating, Joe.
Oh, yeah, very much so.
Go ahead and... What is Palpatine's viewpoint of the current Senate?
Yeah, well, very clearly, from the get-go, when they arrive back on Coruscant and they're actually having that initial conversation with Palpatine, he's kind of laying out what he wants his own agenda to be, but he's doing so in a manner that he's trying to subvert, I think, what they are anticipating him to do. So from the get-go, he's trying to tell Amidala that the current Senate, as it exists, really is not operating as efficiently as it should be, and that there should be some action taken to rectify this.
Yeah, and he makes a really clear point in a discussion on the Senate floor, or basically in the dome, to point out the lobbyists that the Trade Federation basically have in the pocket that are being able to influence Chancellor Valorum at the time, who I believe up to that point is kind of an ally of the Naboo, and basically helps kind of convince this vote of no confidence, right? Because the alternative is the vote of no confidence or what?
Absolutely. So that vote of no confidence, or if that did not take place, who knows? Senate probably would have kept on going as it had been for quite some time. Many people would have considered that to be a very inefficient form of government at the time as well, I think. So I think that's a very interesting perspective.
So let's kind of recap here where we're at. Basically what happens is the Jedi basically fumble the negotiations with the Trade Federation. The Trade Federation invades. Basically, unbeknownst to anybody at this time, though, is that Senator Palpatine of Naboo obviously has an alternate identity, which is Darth Sidious, or we'll know him as Emperor Palpatine later. He's kind of playing both sides against the middle here. He's very cunning. He is going to come out and clearly win this thing. We know that ahead of time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true.
You know, and the whole time I'm sitting here thinking this is he's over here playing, sending Darth Maul, his apprentice. On one side, he's, sending an assassin to kill Amidala. On the other side, he needs her because he needs her to push that vote because she's basically a sympathy vote. Because if you think about it, an assassination attempt gets that sympathy. And he even brings it up that this is, hey, I feel like we'll get the sympathy vote here, especially if you can push for a new chancellor. He ends up obviously winning this chancellorship based on that sympathy vote. So it's, does he think he'll get more sympathy if he kills her? Maybe. But reality is her survival actually probably lends credibility to his ascension. And he's able to become chancellor. Now, one thing that's really striking is we can't really discount the Jedi during this. Again, we talked about how they are glaringly inept in this whole situation. One thing that stuck out to me, though, is, and we kind of discussed this earlier, during the whole time that this conflict is going on during the Phantom Menace, the Jedi Council literally is just sitting in a room.
Yeah.
There are no other Jedi that they send.
They're having a little roundtable discussion about what who knows, but
Yes.
they are not really doing anything to assist who, in theory, is a pretty well-regarded Jedi. We know that Qui-Gon, because of comments Obi-Wan makes, that he doesn't strictly adhere to the code as much as some people would like,
Right.
but it's very clear he has influence and power within their structure. So you think they'd take their analysis of the situation a little bit more seriously.
Yeah. And so not only that, but once they discover Anakin Skywalker on Tatooine, they bring him before the council at Qui-Gon Jinn's behest. He wants this kid trained. He thinks this kid is conceived by midichlorians, that he is the prophecy or the chosen one. He'll bring balance to the Force. That is going to be a whole different discussion for another day.
Yeah.
And getting into Great Jedi. The Jedi Council at first refuses to train this kid. And they bring up very good points. They said he's too old. They said he fears too much for the loss of his mother, which the kid clearly admits. And they, at first, they're not training him. They stick to their guns. This is a very old religious order. They have very strict code that's obviously somewhat been successful for them. They don't deviate from it. And basically because he wasn't taken from birth, he's not going to be trained. And the ironic part is, if they never trained him, what does he become, right? We don't know. Does he somehow still get discovered and become Darth Vader? That's a whole different, ball game. We have no idea.
It's an interesting hypothetical to consider sometime.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Now, Joe, earlier you brought up, in a discussion, you brought up the idea that this vote of no confidence really was for nothing. So go into that.
Yeah, absolutely. So the vote of no confidence, at least in regard to its effect on Naboo, really doesn't hold much sway. So this is where Palpatine secures himself, I think, a powerful win in convincing Amidala to do that. Because let's consider for a moment, Amidala doesn't go before the Senate, declare a vote of no confidence against Chancellor Valorum. She would still likely have gone back to Naboo, staged their revolt, taken back the capital, and overthrown the Trade Federation. They gain no extra assistance from the Jedi Council, from the Republic, outside of Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan, who were there from the get-go.
Correct.
So I find that very interesting that Palpatine is able to convince her to do this before they end up leaving to go back to Naboo. So that was, I mean, a great power play on his part to get that.
And we know how the movie ends, right? They go back. Qui-Gon Jinn is killed by Darth Maul. Obi-Wan is able to kill Darth Maul, or at least what thought killed him, right?
Yeah, right.
He obviously comes back in later versions of the show, other parts of the canon. Most recently, he was in the Solo movie at the very end. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert. That part was awesome, though.
Well, yeah, of course, it was great. And obviously, Palpatine obviously discovers his own, view of Anakin and how he's going to watch his career, very closely.
Yeah,
right?
It's a very great interest.
With great interest,
yeah,
correct.
Absolutely.
And obviously, they basically liberate Naboo. Now, before we go on into the next aspect of, say, the Attack of the Clones and really where the Republic breaks down, right? So we can encapsulate the first basically timeline of the Phantom Menace is really the starting of the unraveling of the Republic. And before we go farther, we talk about the Senate. And the ironic part about this Senate and this bureaucracy they have is this is a galaxy government. This is a government that doesn't actually even control all of the... it doesn't have representatives from every planet because there is a separatist movement. Now, this separatist movement is built out of kind of an argument of non-canon. So, for those of you who aren't well versed in Star Wars universe, there is a trade negotiation set up by Palpatine and the leader of Naboo prior to Amidala taking the throne. This is for their energy source. It's basically to trade it, to put it in a trade route, to basically send it out to the rest of the galaxy. The Trade Federation, being way more competent of big business, basically exploits the Naboo and makes them convinces them to sign a not fair trade deal. Upon Amidala getting to the throne, because the leader of the Naboo originally is killed, she doesn't like this decision, so she decides to back out of this trade deal. So the Trade Federation basically embargoes them based on a deal that they had that was broken by the other party. Are they justified in blockading?
Yeah, see, that's an interesting question, too. I know that they're able to do so, and Newt Gunray also repeatedly says that what he's doing is completely legal, right?
Correct.
So they use these loopholes in the existing system. It's really their free trade legislation that the Senate has implemented. They're using loopholes in that to legally blockade. Now, is it right to do so? I think that's the core of the debate as well, because obviously they're taking advantage of these people on Naboo, which is awful. But in terms of the legality of it, through these loopholes, it could be perceived that they're technically doing this legally, which would mean any action against them is that going against the legality that's in place there. That's an interesting question.
And I just want to point out the irony of a trade federation or a banking clan, any of these big business federation systems, having a representative in the government.
Yeah.
It's like having a direct lobbyist in the government for them. I just found that kind of ironic. It really shows how the bureaucracy could really hamp down, and why none of them trust the idea that if this goes to a committee versus a vote of no confidence, they're not going to get anything settled. And if they do, it's going to take literally years, as they say throughout the series, to get anything done by the Senate. So it basically becomes gridlocked. I kind of came up with some other things here, just kind of a rundown of errors made by the Republic. We talked about the kind of underhandedness of sending the Jedi as ambassadors. And Joe, let me ask you this. Mm-hmm. During this whole time, why does the Council just not send more Jedi?
Yeah, that's also a great question. And while I don't believe they ever address it outright, I also speculate that they know who's involved thus far. They probably don't want to get any further involved.
Okay.
Because while they are certainly on the side of the Senate, on the side of the Republic, they're trying to take the best interests of that relationship and the Republic in general to heart. I think it's pretty clear that they're trying to kind of stay detached from this. Because to speak to your point, what if they had sent even like 5 or 6 Jedi are really powerful. What if they sent 5 or 6 extra Jedi to help Qui-Gon and Obi-Wan out?
Yep.
Right?
And we know from Yoda's own calculations or statements, there's thousands of Jedi throughout the galaxy that are known.
Yes.
Before the Purge. Here's another one. For an organization, or the religious organization that the Jedi are with their strict code, why trade Anakin?
Why train Anakin?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why? I mean, they all acknowledge that they think he's too old. There's too much question. There's too much fear.
Right. There's that internal conflict.
Yep.
Very
fear leads to
very
anger.
much there, yeah.
Anger leads to hate. And hate leads to suffering. So why break code and train this kid?
Yeah, and I think that is an interesting part at the very end of the movie, because up until that point, it has been a very clear line in the sand. They're not going to be doing this. Qui-Gon dies, though.
Yes.
Obi-Wan swears to Qui-Gon that this is what he is going to do.
Yes.
So it almost seems like, as part of knighting Obi-Wan, that they also, I guess somehow in there, they must have a conversation where they go, oh, I know we said we weren't going to train him because of all these very valid reasons, but you made a promise to Qui-Gon, so go for it.
Well, and let's get let's talk about knighting Obi-Wan. So here's a Padawan who, for as far as we know, for 1,000 years is the only person that's killed a Sith, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so, which brings me to the idea that when Qui-Gon acknowledges or tries to convince the council that he thinks he was attacked by a Sith, they refuse to acknowledge it, or basically say, well, that can't be. And even Obi-Wan, at least per Phantom Menace movie, clearly witnesses this fight take place outside of the spaceship on Tatooine. Why do they refuse to acknowledge the return of a Sith? Then, follow-up question, why knight Obi-Wan as a Padawan and then give him training duties over the kid that they don't want to train?
Mm-hmm.
So, go ahead, Joe.
Yeah, that's a great series of questions that you have there. I think overall, that sequence where Qui-Gon's fighting Darth Maul, phenomenal duel, by the way. I love that scene.
It's great.
But I think that it's very interesting that, once again, they aren't committing any resources at all. And to tie that back to where Qui-Gon seems to be pretty well respected, Obi-Wan's very near to becoming a knight, as we learned by the end of that. He's very close to, he's ready to take the trials. They have that conversation that he's going to become a knight soon. So when these two very, very valid Jedi come before the council and say, hey, here's what happened, it's rather baffling that the Jedi don't actually assign some resources to that. I think it speaks to their arrogance and their confidence that, especially among the council members, they're right. Yep. Qui-Gon's wrong. That's the last they'll hear about it. And then they move on from there.
And I would think they would trust Qui-Gon enough to see somebody who's wielding a lightsaber acknowledge that that is a lightsaber. And obviously, up until Finn, we had not seen a non-Jedi handle a lightsaber. We didn't even know really if they could.
Right? Yeah, that's true. I mean, based on what you see in the movies, it's very clear that, okay, yeah, Jedi's supposed to handle this. The Han scene in Empire Strikes Back notwithstanding, of course,
correct,
where he cuts open the tauntaun. I get that scene's there. But someone actively wielding it, yes, you're right. I think it's Finn the first time that we actually see that.
Or wielding it with such precision of somebody who clearly is trained with it.
Yes, exactly.
Okay, so moving along now. So as we move into the timeline of Attack of the Clones, things get a little bit more kind of... Oh, sorry, I apologize. I'm going to step back here. Before we go to the clones, I want to talk about Palpatine. So, obviously, in the first timeline here of the Phantom Menace, he is a senator. He is not shown really any outwardly Sith-type things. We obviously see him sometimes in holograms as the Sith Master. You know, it's really interesting. If you go back and you watch the Phantom Menace, upon her Amidala's return, you talked about the way Palpatine discussed the Senate, and really this basically this breakdown of bureaucracy. It is really interesting, and it kind of goes to a conversation that in the clones that Anakin is going to have with Padme in the rolling meadows as they frolic around together, right? They're going to talk about the way government should operate.
Yes,
and it's kind of interesting that when you start to discuss things like a democracy versus a dictatorship, that obviously in a democracy where everybody gets the right to, or basically representatives, if you're in a republic, get to vote, which they are clearly in a republic, things have to basically have a majority consent, and that can really bog things down. And that's why you have to compromise, right? You have to get the opposition party to agree to what you're doing. Vice versa, a dictatorship, you basically just roll through and do what you want, right? The other thing is, this idea of what do you think Palpatine's move would do if Amidala pushed it to a committee?
If she pushed it to the committee, that would be an interesting turn of events for sure.
I mean, go ahead. No, please go ahead.
Yeah, no, just from what Palpatine is setting as his own expectations for how he wants this to go down, I think he would have had to probably backtrack a bit, shuffle some things around.
I mean, I think it really throws him a curveball. If this goes to committee, I mean, we really don't know at this time how many other senators he has. Like, we don't know what his political reach is.
Exactly. We don't really even touch on
him. Right. We know he's a cunning politician because he's clearly maneuvering everything behind the scenes. I mean, if this goes to committee, I know that he's arguably trying to kill her. We don't really know if he's trying that hard. Like, we know Maul's there. We really don't know if this is something where they could, I mean, because if he's controlling the Trade Federation, why don't they invade more, right? So, like, if her death is everything that matters, I'm sure they could get that done. The other thing is this idea that he does want her to kind of be alive because he needs her to push this. So it's kind of like, I know that Maul's there to try to kill her, but the reality is, do you think, Joe, this has a bigger impact if she dies and they have another senator push this vote? Or do you think it helps that her country's or her planet's invaded, she's the one that's going to have the sympathy, she's the one coming before the Senate and begging?
Absolutely. I think it's the latter of those two. Very much so. Her being alive, able to actually take that story of what's happening to her people back to the Senate, come before them and speak to that, I think that's very powerful. She's very much in a position where she can use that to her advantage. Well, of course, it's to Palpatine's advantage, but she's also kind of on his side at this point in the Phantom Menace. She kind of agrees with him, right? Yeah. She ends up doing that vote of no confidence for Chancellor Valorum there. So overall, too, I think it's interesting in terms of his relationship with the Trade Federation, because I don't think they necessarily have any knowledge, of course, of who he is, that he is right. Palpatine. So when you mention he's playing both sides, he very much is. He's trying to be a powerful figurehead for the Trade Federation, but he's got his own agenda, and I think he's got probably multiple contingency plans depending on how things shake out for him.
Which is interesting, because if you think about it, he doesn't actually send Maul to Tatooine or to Naboo until after she votes. Mm-hmm. Once she votes and she decides she's returning, then he sends her. Because now he doesn't need her anymore.
He doesn't need her,
He can have her literally killed now by Maul. And so he does send her. So obviously after the Phantom Menace timeline, we talked about how, basically finishes with him kind of looking down at Anakin, saying that, he's going to watch his career with great interest. Mm-hmm. And obviously we know that that's the future relationship between Emperor Palpatine and Darth Vader. So moving along here, we're going to go into the Attack of the Clones. What's interesting about this one is, so Padme, or Queen Amidala basically, she shows up. She's flying in on her spaceship at the beginning, and she lands, and there's an assassination attempt. Mm-hmm. Now, she's coming back as a senator, right? She's no longer Queen of Naboo. Mm-hmm. She's now a senator. She's coming back, and it's very important to know, she is there to vote no on a basically a proposition to create a army or a standing army for the Republic to basically engage with the Trade Federation or separatists. Mm-hmm. So at this time, the separatists have really kind of become their own confederacy of systems.
Yes, correct.
Led by, who we'll find out, Count Dooku. Mm-hmm. Okay, what can you tell us about the separatists? Anything that comes to mind to kind of talk about them before we get into really the Attack of the Clones, the meat of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a big part of it, and they don't really delve into it from what you see in the movies, so I am pulling a little bit outside of that, but they have a lot of support. In the films, it makes it seem like this, Confederacy only has a small group of people. They mentioned the banking clan, for example, the Techno Union. So they throw out a couple things in a conference scene in Attack of the Clones, but in the other elements of canon, they have a lot of support behind them, to the point where the Republic probably finding a way to effectively defend themselves, that might not be such a bad idea. So that's an interesting lens to look through it as well.
Sure. Now, okay, so we acknowledge that she's on her way here to vote no on a proposition to create an army. Mm-hmm. What nobody seems to know yet is that this army is already created.
Yes.
Right? This
Very
is
true.
the clone army
it's the elephant in the room
already exists, there. Right? And,
mm-hmm.
and nobody knows that yet, even in the timeline here. But the ironic part is, she's there to vote no on an army, and Palpatine and Dooku basically have already taken control of this army for their own aims, right? I mean, granted, they never had it created. We'll get into Sifo Dyas later. Mm-hmm. But they basically, by the time, because he is killed off, they're basically controlling it. So here's the ironic part is, Palpatine has two armies. He's got a clone army now, and he's got a drone army. Mm-hmm. He knows we're going to get to this position. He's clearly playing 4D chess, and everybody else is playing checkers because he basically got control of both. So he's going to argue, if they don't create a clone army, well, my droid army is going to run them over. Mm-hmm. If they create a clone army, it's going to be a better army. I can just shut droids down, right? Which is essentially what they do.
Yeah.
So it's kind of ironic that they're there to basically, not that they don't know there's greater forces out there to play with, that they don't realize that this vote doesn't matter. This vote won't even really take place yet. Anyways, here nor there. The best part about this is, after the assassination attempt, we get to meet an older Anakin, right? Played by Hayden Christensen. And obviously, Obi-Wan is now his Jedi Master. They basically come in and Anakin has these thoughts about Padme, right? He's clearly in love with her. He's in love with her ever since he was a kid. He thought he was he asked if she was a space angel or whatever it was.
Right. Yeah,
he
asked if she's an angel. That's correct.
And I don't want to get into the debate of whether it's a mother replacement or if it's really his love, all this stuff, which we can talk about at a different time. Mm-hmm. But he clearly has feelings for her. Well, Palpatine, being a Sith Lord, has been watching Anakin through the timeline and notices how powerful he is, and probably notices the feelings he has for Padme. Mm-hmm. So, upon her arrival to the Senate in the failed assassination attempt, he recommends protection. And he brings in and he recommends to the Jedi Council, which they accept, Anakin and Obi-Wan, people that she would previously know that she would be okay with because she's pretty stubborn. Mm-hmm. She doesn't really want people to tell her what to do. And so basically they bring Anakin back. And this is a way to basically, he obviously convinces Anakin that he's the most powerful Jedi in their conversations. And it's a way to basically put these together, right? And bring them back into the fray. What's your viewpoint on the Jedi Council accepting Palpatine's recommendation at this time and bringing in Anakin and Obi-Wan?
Yeah, absolutely. I think from the perspective of having a couple familiar faces, very clearly she's in danger. They want to extend protection to her. That all makes perfect sense. What I love about that, of course, is that, it's from Palpatine directly that they're taking this advice. So there's talk, jumping ahead a little bit, don't want to do that too much, about how their ability to actually sense the Sith, their ability to fully utilize the Force is diminished. I think this is the first real example of that we get before they get to that conversation. But yeah, from that perspective, Palpatine comes in, makes a recommendation. It seems logical for them to, sure, Obi-Wan, Anakin, you know her already. Go provide some protection. So I can see why those things would fall into place the way that they do. Obviously, no one really seems to know Anakin's feelings toward Padme, and that's where things start to take a turn.
Right, which let's talk about, because in the movie at least, and I know in the book it's probably more hashed out in the novel, every time he seems to be talking to anybody, whether it's C-3PO, whether it's Jar Jar, whether it's R2, he is talking out loud in the open about how he's nervous, about how she doesn't think about it, how she didn't like him watching her, so she closed the door or whatever, the curtains, whatever it is, the monitoring system. All these things. Does nobody think to themselves, this is not the way a Jedi should be thinking?
Right. And I think that's a good point to bring in. I think there's a couple lines of dialogue where Obi-Wan kind of gently tries to guide Anakin a bit in that his emotions toward her.
Sure.
But there's definitely never any, I would say, a concrete confrontation between a Jedi and Anakin saying, this is not what you signed up for.
Right, of course, yeah. You have to be celibate, right? This is a religion. This is something that you're in the church now. Again, moving on. We're not breaking down scene by scene. So what I want to do now is we're going to go to a divergence. We're going to go to, after another assassination attempt, Palpatine basically recommends that Amidala leave, and Amidala ends up taking Anakin, and they go back to her home planet. Okay. Mm-hmm. Obi-Wan goes to follow a dart.
Yes.
And tracks it down to Kamino, right? Mm-hmm. In doing so, let's start with Obi-Wan, and we'll come back to Anakin because they're going to have this discussion in the field, which is just interesting. So, Obi-Wan tracks this dart to a planet that doesn't exist in the Jedi Council, right? It is deleted.
Yes.
Okay? So, two people, in my opinion, could have deleted this, and I want you to basically make the argument for who you think deleted it.
Sure thing.
Sifo Dyas, who we will find out when we get to here in a second, is the gentleman who put in the order for this army, or Count Dooku. Mm-hmm. And who is Count Dooku?
Yeah, so Count Dooku is, in fact, a former Jedi, member of the Order. He's still considered a Jedi, I believe, at this point in time. But for quite a while at this point, he has kind of been off doing his own thing. So about 8 to 10 years, probably, somewhere in there, that he's actively kind of stepped down from his role as a Jedi and acting officially in that capacity. And he's off doing his own thing. Doesn't sound like the Jedi have kept too close of tabs on what he's doing. They call him a political idealist, so we know that is kind of how they view Count Dooku. And he ends up having some very compelling arguments that he uses, of course, to bring people over to his cause. But that's essentially what he's been doing in that span of time, unbeknownst to the Jedi, is he has been consolidating that power, really kind of getting this confederacy to the point where both he and Palpatine want it to be, and that's kind of the events of Attack of the Clones and how that unfolds between the clones, of course, and the battle droids.
Okay. And then explain who Sifo Dyas is.
Yeah, so Sifo Dyas, he's one of my favorite characters that basically has zero screen time at all. He's brought up a little bit more in the animated series, which I highly recommend you check out. But Sifo Dyas, he essentially was a Jedi that I believe was known to have pretty potent foresight. So he's respected amongst his peers. This is what I also find rather baffling. He's respected amongst his peers for having this ability to foresee the future. He foresees a massive conflict. Now, of course, we know that his foresight is accurate. There is this massive conflict coming. The Jedi tell him that they don't agree, that they aren't going to move forward with creating a standing army, which the Republic has not had for quite some time. They act strictly in a judiciary capacity for most of what they do for peacekeeping endeavors up to this point. So they don't want to move forward with this standing army. So Sifo Dyas runs off. He goes to the cloners at Kamino. He commissions the creation of this clone army. So he does this essentially on his own.
Now, where you said that, who gives him permission for this clone army? Who does he tell Kamino gives him permission for this army?
He advises, I believe, that it is the council, if memory serves me.
Okay, because I thought it said the Senate.
Is it the Senate who gives it? Yeah, okay.
Yes. Okay, so keep going.
Yeah, absolutely. So from there, they, of course, create the clone army, begin the creation of the clone army, I should say. Following which, Count Dooku, Palpatine, they catch wind of this. They actually have Sifo Dyas assassinated.
Yep.
They are able to then effectively take control from there of the clone army. They kind of have Sifo Dyas' name live on so they can keep up this facade, of course. And that's the big kicker here is Palpatine uses this opportunity to implant the chip, which enables Order 66, which is used to wipe out all the Jedi, of course. So it's right at this pretty crucial juncture that they're able to kind of hijack this clone army for their own needs.
Perfect. Who deletes the planet?
Yeah, so from here, I think it's Dooku.
You think it's Dooku?
I think it's Dooku. I think Dooku has enough clout that he is able to, and also up to this point, he isn't, I don't think, restricted from coming back to the Jedi temple there.
Not probably when he deleted it, right?
Not when he deleted it.
We're talking years ago the deletion took place.
This has been quite some time in between when Attack of the Clones, the film, begins, and the events of Sifo Dyas and the creation of the clone army. There's been some time involved there. But yeah, I think he was probably able to go back in and...
You know, and it's funny that we talked about the ineptitude of the Jedi. If you remember when Obi-Wan starts to question where this planet exists, the Jedi librarian says, well, if it's not there, it's not there, right?
It's not there, yeah.
If it doesn't exist, then it doesn't exist. And basically, not that she could be wrong, that he was wrong, right? Again, okay. So, we talked about, Obi-Wan follows to Kamino.
Yes.
He discovers this clone army is being built. Now, one thing that I thought was interesting, and maybe it's a continuity error, maybe I'm wrong and I remember this wrong, because I remember in the movie, he makes the acknowledgement that the Republic gave Sifo Dyas permission to build this army, which we know is not true.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when Obi-Wan is relaying this message back to Windu and Yoda, he says that the Senate, he doesn't remember the Senate ever creating a clone army, and Windu makes the comment, no, he did not have the Jedi Council's order to do this. So what it does is brings up is this idea of whose order would really go into effect. If the Jedi Council had ordered Sifo Dyas to create a standing army, would he have created a standing army? And do they need the Senate's vote or do they need the Jedi Council's vote to do this? And what happens when they're conflicting? So kind of break that down in your opinion, Joe.
Yeah, so this is strictly my opinion here on the topic. I do think Sifo Dyas probably would have taken whichever avenue was available to him if he was provided with the opportunity to make this.
Correct.
I think how they kind of lay it out in the movies, of course, is that the Jedi Council has a ton of power. They're able to function much more directly than the Senate can because they simply don't have to get caught up in the voting process.
Sure.
They're able to determine that amongst themselves on the council. So I think that's something that Sifo-Dyas, personally, if the Senate had told him, oh yeah, go create the standing army force, he would have done it probably for them. Ideally, I think he would have liked for the council's approval, the Jedi Council's approval, to go do it, because it was to the Jedi Council that he brought his concerns and was turned away and told that, no, this is not something that we're going to pursue.
Okay. So, why Obi-Wan is on Camino, he obviously starts fighting with Jango Fett.
Yep.
We know Jango Fett is the person that they use as the likeness for all of the clones. He is also the father of one Boba Fett, who's obviously a very popular figure. What's interesting, though, is Jango tells Obi-Wan he never met Sifo-Dyas. He was contracted by Darth Tyrannus.
Yes.
Which we know Darth Tyrannus is Dooku. So my question is, how does this army start getting built? And that army would have already had to start being commissioned. So is Jango simply lying to Obi-Wan, in your opinion? Or is there something else that maybe there was an original person used for the clone army and they ended up switching to Jango Fett?
I think he's telling the truth. I've always find it interesting that he just name drops Tyrannus, because
yes.
Really, I don't think many other places in the film, at least in terms of the Sith trying to kind of remain secretive, no one's out there just name-dropping Darth Sidious and Darth Tyrannus and Darth Maul, unless it's amongst each other as Sith. So I find that, I love that scene where he's like, yeah, I was recruited by Tyrannus on the moons
he doesn't
of
call
Bogdan.
him Darth. Right?
No, he doesn't.
He just calls him Tyrannus. Yeah.
So I think very early on, and where Sifo-Dyas commissions this army to be built, I believe he is assassinated very shortly afterwards. So really the entire planning process is probably under the guise of, or I should say, under the orders of Tyrannus and Palpatine.
Okay.
I believe. That's my opinion, though.
Nope, that's okay. That's what we're here for. Okay, so let's sidetrack now back to Anakin. So Anakin and Padme, they're off to Naboo. And obviously Anakin's loving this, right? He's on this personal mission of protection of the woman he loves. For whatever reason, she's starting to get into him too. We don't really know why she's into him. We're not going to get into their age difference between movie 1 and 2. That's just, we're not going to go there. But what's interesting is during this time period, they have this little jaunt out in the rolling meadows of Naboo, and they have this frolicking picnic, and they have this conversation. They have this conversation about government. And she asks Anakin, what type of government should there be? And he says, all the senators should get together. They should vote on something for the best, what's best for the people. They should decide it, and they should just vote on it, right? Mm-hmm. So basically they should decide what's the best situation, vote, agree. And Padme says, well, that is how it works. That is the system we have. It's just that not everybody always agrees. And Anakin clearly goes, well, then they should be made to.
Yeah.
And Padme has this great comment where she goes, well, who's going to make them? You? And he goes, no, not me. Somebody wise. Mm-hmm. And, and it's just an interesting introspect into who we know Anakin becomes. But this idea that, well, somebody should make them. What's your opinion on this, Joe?
Yeah, obviously, it's great foreshadowing, just from a narrative perspective, right? We do know how the story ends. So hearing Anakin, pre-Darth Vader, talk about, well, people should be made to do certain things. Right. It's a great little line of dialogue thrown in there. Overall, of course, in terms of my opinion on people being made to do anything, obviously that's a very forceful approach, one that is indicative of how a Sith would certainly behave. Don't agree with his approach to his suggested approach, and I think it's great that Padme in that sequence does call him out on the fact that, well, what you just described is exactly what's in place. It's just not as clean as that. It's not as clear-cut as that.
Sure.
There's going to be a lot of different opinions people have.
Sure. Well, and the other thing is, if you watch the movie, when he makes that comment, she side-eyes him. And it lingers, right? She's second-guessing him. Now, one thing I read about, I was reading about this online, and it's a theory. Nobody's really been able to say. I don't know if it exists in the novel. Anakin starts to have these dreams when he's on Naboo.
Yeah, that's right.
Of suffering. Mm-hmm. And some people have thought that this is Palpatine sending through the Force these images of his mother suffering. Do you buy that, or do you think he's just dreaming because he's always been concerned about his mom?
It's an interesting theory. I think that Palpatine certainly has, up to this point, a lot of control over Anakin's development.
Sure.
I don't think, because if in you've watched these more recently than I have, I believe in that sequence where he's having these dreams, it is his mother, of course, that's in danger of some kind. That is true. That actually is correct, which of course prompts his desire to leave Naboo in the first place to kind of go check on her. So I don't necessarily think that it's Palpatine doing that. I think he's having a force vision, essentially, of some kind, that's kind of letting him see what's happening elsewhere because of his connection to his mother. He's always been very close to his mother throughout his childhood, especially, of course. So
okay, a little jump ahead here. Do you think Palpatine sends the force visions of Padme dying in Revenge of the Sith?
Ooh, that's interesting.
All right, well, think on that. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
Okay. One thing I want to bring up, too, is during this time, as Obi is back on Kamino, we're going to kind of backtrack to Obi-Wan Kenobi here. He has this conversation with Windu and Yoda about Sifo Dyas, and when he hangs up the phone to the hologram,
right,
Windu and Yoda turn to each other, and they acknowledge that, do they think they should let the Senate know that they are no longer able to protect them, or that their ability to protect the Republic is no longer valid? Mm-hmm. And Yoda says, no, let's not tell them anything.
Right.
So, for their ineptitude to actually think that a Sith exists, I think by now they clearly know that there's some form of dark force at work.
Absolutely.
And I don't think they know what it is yet. I don't think they've even acknowledged that it's a Sith. I don't believe they have yet. I just think that they know that something's going on. They're obviously 2 steps behind. They realize that there are now 2 armies that they don't control, right? They're not controlling either army right now.
Yeah, that's very true.
So their ability to be protectors of the galaxy really is kind of null and void, right? We're talking thousands of Jedi versus arguably millions of soldiers, okay? What's your opinion, your view on of Yoda and Windu having this little discussion in the Jedi Council in their ivory tower, and then deciding not to let the representatives of the people know?
Right. So from here, I definitely think they're trying to save face a little bit. They don't necessarily want to come forward with this. On the flip side of that, I kind of understand their logic. I don't think they want to incite panic, because keep in mind there has not been a standing army. At this point, the Republic knows of no standing army. So who the Republic views as your protector, essentially, this judiciary force that goes out and kind of acts to protect the Republic as it currently exists, now you'd have someone coming and telling you, oh, I know we're pretty much the only safeguard you have in place, and we can't do this anymore.
Okay.
So I think they are trying to avoid inciting panic in that sense as well. Headcanon-wise, I would hope that they take this information and would try to investigate it further so that they can make an informed decision on how to proceed from there. They do that to a certain extent, but we know some poor decisions that are to follow. I won't skip ahead, but...
Sure. Okay. Mm-hmm. Well, let's move along here. So Obi-Wan discovers that, obviously, he follows Jango to Geonosis. He discovers the droid army being built. He basically discovers a big business meeting between the Trade Federation, the Banking Clan, the Droid Techno Union.
The Commerce Guild in there,
yes,
everybody.
You basically have the Forbes 500 of the galaxy meeting with Dooku here, and how they're going to basically... continue their separatist movement, right? This confederacy of systems. Mm-hmm. And again, keep in mind, the original gripe here was taxation of trade routes. They believed that they were being basically taxed by their trade routes and they were getting an unfair deal. And they decided that they didn't want to be a part of the rules of the Senate, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, during this time, we know that Anakin discovers his mother has been, basically a captive of the Sand People, and he basically tracks them down and basically just murders them. Yeah, right. So it's an epic scene. It's a pretty amazing scene, and it's really the first thing that we know that he, the first step to being Darth Vader.
Yeah, right? It's a very dark turn for his development, for sure.
I don't want to talk about his killing. What I want to talk about is Yoda's reaction to this. Yoda is back in the Jedi Council again, having this vision of Anakin doing this, or basically just being in pain, terrible pain as he calls it. Windu walks in. They're discussing of how much pain he's in, of this horrible whatever event took place. It doesn't really say that they can see the event. They just know something really bad happened, and they never mention it again. Yeah. When they finally meet back up with Anakin later, they don't discuss it. Like, you're fearful of this guy who's supposed to be this really extremely powerful Jedi who's obviously conceived by midichlorians, or this virgin birth, right? We don't know who his father is, right? And you don't ever bring up this thing that clearly gave Yoda force visions. What's your opinion on this? Like, they just, we're just going to let this go. Like, there's so many red flags with Anakin Skywalker.
Red flags all over the place. A huge missed opportunity here to probably provide some guidance.
Yeah, how about a coaching?
Yeah, a little coaching session to help him through this pain that he's very clearly having.
Yes.
So I think it's a missed opportunity. I find it very strange that they don't kind of take him aside, inform Obi-Wan, like, hey man, how about you talk to your Padawan, have a little one-on-one.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, make sure he's okay.
Yeah.
Definitely a big misstep, I think, there.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, Anakin meets back up with Padme. He basically goes through his speech about how he'll never, fail again. Mm-hmm. People that loved him won't die. This is really important because obviously his viewpoint of Padme later in the Revenge of the Sith. He basically gets back to his ship. He finds out Yoda's been basically, or not Yoda, I apologize. Obi-Wan has been basically taken prisoner on Geonosis. And then we're into this discussion with Obi-Wan and Dooku, because I think this is probably one of the most important discussions. So Obi-Wan is basically prisoner, and Count Dooku walks in, and it's the first time they see each other, and they've interacted. Mm-hmm. Now, Dooku basically tells Obi-Wan that he wishes Qui-Gon Jinn, who was his Padawan, was still alive, because he is pretty confident that Qui-Gon would side with him. And Obi-Wan obviously says, no, he wouldn't. Okay? We're not going to debate whether Qui-Gon would have joined Dooku or not. We won't do that.
Sure, that's a whole session.
That's a whole different session, right? Yeah. And we'll get into Qui-Gon later. What I want to talk about, though, is Dooku tells this story of the Trade Federation coming to Dooku about 10 years ago because they were basically ripped off by a man named Darth Sidious. Okay? Mm-hmm. And that basically they're trying to get back at Darth Sidious or a Sith Lord, and that the Sith Lord has a handful of senators in his pocket, and he is actually in control of the Senate right now. Doesn't name Palpatine, doesn't name him. So he can't put two and two together that Chancellor Palpatine is the Sith Lord. He just acknowledged that the Sith have this hold over certain members of the Senate, and they're able to control things. And Obi-Wan refuses this. Dooku asks Obi-Wan to join him to defeat the Sith. So my question to you is Dooku lying to Obi-Wan? Because to me, he's telling him the truth, right? We acknowledge he's telling him the truth?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's very true.
Why does he tell that story to him?
I think overall, he's almost proving a point to himself in this scene. Dooku is telling Obi-Wan the truth in regard to a Sith's influence over the current Republic, over the Senate, and I think he knows that Obi-Wan's going to refute that and say that he's incorrect. So in a way, I think he's looking for an opportunity to kind of get rid of him in a roundabout way. I think Dooku is very confident that Obi-Wan is going to do exactly what he does.
Okay.
So that's kind of how I read that scene.
Okay. Sure. We're going to streamline past the attack in the Colosseum with all the amazing Jedi show up, right? We're not going to get into that.
Cool sequence.
What we're going to get to then is, before this happens, back in the Senate, they're trying to decide if there's a debate going on between raising the clone army, right? To basically allow the clone army to become the army of the Republic. Mm-hmm. They all acknowledge, Palpatine, the Jedi Council, acknowledge that any type of debate would take years to do and therefore would really make them weak. Mm-hmm. If only they had a senator to basically make a motion to grant emergency powers to Chancellor Palpatine. Mm-hmm. Now, keep in mind, Amidala showed up to vote no on this standing army. Now that she's not in the picture, her, associate representative Jar Jar Binks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Jar Jar making an appearance.
Right.
Yeah.
Palpatine goes, if only somebody would do this. Mm-hmm. Basically rolling his eyes at Jar Jar, and Jar Jar's sitting there blinking. Oh, me? Yeah, great. I'll do it. Right? Jedi Council doesn't push back, just says, yep, this is, whatever. Mm-hmm. And Jar Jar Binks, a clearly, I don't even know if you'd call him a one-term senator, representative of Naboo. Clearly is lacking intelligence. We know this. I mean, we know he speaks per Qui-Gon Jinn, right? But ability to speak does not make one intelligent.
I love that.
He pushes this motion forward to basically grant emergency powers to Chancellor Palpatine, and Palpatine then basically acknowledges, in a way of Caesar, that once he's done his duty, he will relinquish his power and give it back to the people.
Yes. What a great line he throws out there to try to...
What are people thinking here?
Yeah. I think overall the panic that perhaps Yoda and Windu were trying to avoid, it's right here where that is what Palpatine knows he needs to take advantage of. That here is this impending conflict. It's unavoidable. We need some way to combat this. Sure, we can deliberate for, as you mentioned, potentially years, or we can take action right now to have a solution to this problem. So it serves as a great kind of, just later on in the same movie, exactly what Anakin was saying in the field scene, right? It's kind of, it's already happening in that sense. Obviously, it's a poor decision for everyone to make.
I just don't understand how
Palpatine does, but
no other senator in this entire arena thought, maybe this new guy shouldn't be the one to do it.
Yeah, you would think that someone would probably speak up to do that, but...
Or how about this? Not even just the new guy. And this isn't to be like a galaxy racist, but nobody up through this point thought Gungans were an intelligent race in this story, right? The Gungan that clearly is the water people that lives underwater that clearly didn't get along with the Naboo, that they only really used when they needed them, right? And only bridged this gap. They allow the Gungan to basically grant the emergency powers to Palpatine to basically take over this Jedi, or this clone army. It's baffling. It's baffling that that's what happened. I don't even know if that's more of Palpatine's being a cunning politician or a Sith Lord, or just the ineptitude of the Republic and the system in which they have. Right? Does nobody second these motions in this part? Do they not have parliamentary procedure? Does nobody have to second it? They just have to say, "Yep, it's somebody who said it, so we're going to vote it." Right? All right, moving on. Sorry. It really just baffles me. Palpatine's granted emergency powers. We know that the movie ends with a big war. We know it ends with Anakin getting his arm cut off, right?
Yep.
Part robotic. We know it ends with Dooku fighting Yoda, which was a horrible fight. I thought the idea of Yoda being this guy who does these Matrix moves was ridiculous. The Force fight they had was great, right? The lightning and the pushing and the shoving.
Yeah, I think it's really cool. That's a great sequence that speaks to Yoda's power, because he's not acting aggressively, and it's very clear he's more powerful than Dooku.
Yes.
I think that's a great exemplification of what's good about the Jedi, so that's a cool sequence.
Yeah. And then obviously the movie ends with a private ceremonial wedding between Anakin and Padme, which will have clear repercussions in the next movie's timeline. Now, before we jump to the next timeline, a few things I wanted to bring up here is that, again, nobody seems concerned about Anakin's thoughts.
Yeah.
We acknowledge that nobody's concerned that he basically massacred and butchered the Sand people, that nobody seems to question him about it. At least in the timeline or in canon, we don't get that conversation. Nobody can sense that he has these relations with Padme. Nobody can see it. And let's be fair. The idea that they can't even see... They can't see him. They can't see Palpatine. They can't see anything.
Right.
They can't sense Palpatine. They can't sense Anakin. They can't sense Padme. I mean, they can't read Padme's relationship with Anakin.
Right.
I mean, it really is... Their ineptitude, their hubris, whatever you call it, their just lack of... I don't know, control. I mean, if you're going to tell me that one Sith Lord is really stronger than the Jedi Council, and we're talking about Windu, the most powerful lightsaber Jedi, and Yoda, who's probably the most powerful Force-using Jedi, can't sense the Sith standing 2 feet from him?
Yeah, I know you can read into it, of course, that because Palpatine also being very powerful, he's able to kind of bring this shroud, so to speak, via the Force over himself to make it very difficult for the Jedi to detect. But to speak to your point, of course, as well about Padme, the relationship with Anakin, I think, and I'm reading into this a bit, but there's probably a bit of a blind eye that they're turning there.
Yep.
By the time, and I know we're going to transition here, I believe, into the third movie, of course, Revenge of the Sith. So by that point in time, Anakin, of course, is a very capable pilot and very capable swordsman. Probably one of the greatest Jedi that they have in their ranks. So, just like I said, reading into it a bit, but I think some of them very clearly do know there's something there, and they're choosing just not to act on it, I would say.
No, I agree. Okay, so let's move into the third movie, and we're going to kind of go through the third movie faster here. We're going to hit some of the main points. So, one of the main points is at the beginning of the movie, Palpatine is basically taken hostage by General Grievous, who makes his first appearance, I believe, in the canon. He's a robot lightsaber wielding. I guess a non-Force user wielding a lightsaber.
Yeah, he's a non-Force user. He takes those as trophies, I believe, is the canon explanation for how he has acquired these lightsabers over time.
Sure,
he has so many of them.
But we do acknowledge that he was trained, though. He's not a non-lightsaber wielding guy in theory. He is trained by Dooku to wield this lightsaber. Anyways, moving along, Anakin and Obi-Wan basically get on the ship. They basically secure and do a lightsaber fight with Dooku, at which point Obi-Wan is rendered unconscious. Anakin basically chops off the hands of Dooku, and Palpatine immediately starts to hiss, kill him, right?
Yeah.
And Anakin murders him. Right? Doesn't take him prisoner, murders him. Now, in the novel, we had discussed earlier today, Joe, that the novel is a little bit different. The novel basically has a conversation between Dooku and Palpatine before the Jedi show up. He is convincing Dooku to kill Obi-Wan and then to surrender to Anakin to make this a great triumvirate of Sith Lords, right? And that they're going to make Anakin eventually one of them, and the three of them will rule the galaxy. Only after this, he gets his hand cuts off, and he realizes that, he tells Anakin to kill Dooku. The Dooku realizes he's the one being set up, right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Okay, so Anakin now kills Dooku, doesn't even think about it, doesn't take him hostage. So not only did he butcher sand creatures, he now basically murdered a Sith Lord, right? Mm-hmm. Whether Dooku, deserves it or not, that's not the debate. The debate is the Jedi way. Okay. We find out after that Amidala is pregnant, that they've been married, that they're obviously having relations. And moving along, we find out that Palpatine basically gets Anakin appointed to the Jedi Council. Now, I don't know what rule that the Supreme Chancellor has to basically appoint somebody to the Jedi Council. What's your thought on this?
Yeah, so this is very clearly Palpatine trying to gain as much influence as possible. I think for him, having someone who can actually keep tabs on the Jedi Council, of course, that's the final piece he's looking for. Because as powerful as he is, he's been consolidating this power for some time, taking over the Senate, becoming the Supreme Chancellor, of course, all these different things. This is the missing link for him, I think. So it makes sense for Palpatine to push for representation.
It's not just pushing for representation; it's pushing of representation of Anakin.
Yes, specifically
it's pushing Anakin and building that bond tighter between him and Anakin, which we see a lot because during this time period we talked about earlier that Anakin is having these visions of Padme dying, right? That she is suffering, and he clearly wants to save her. And there's a conversation that takes place between Palpatine and Anakin, where Palpatine kind of insinuates that he's a Sith Lord, right? I mean, it's inferred.
Yeah.
He starts talking about a dark Jedi or a Sith Lord named, Darth Plagueis.
Yep, Darth Plagueis.
And that he is the only person who could cheat death, right? Now, it's not outward said that he was the Padawan of Darth Vader, or the Sith apprentice of Darth Plagueis. In the books, it does come out and say it. But basically, he just kind of puts this little seed out there saying, if you want to learn other ways of the Force, there's somebody else to teach you. And there's other things to learn that you can't learn from a Jedi. What's your thought on this?
Yeah, so this is a kind of terrifyingly great sequence. I think really greatly acted out there as well. But yeah, he's pushing his influence. He's taking every advantage he's had up to this point with Anakin, and he's making a play that he knows Anakin will probably follow, because Anakin's terrified he's going to lose Padme, he's going to lose his children, and this is the only avenue that he sees to be able to protect them. Combined with the fact that, of course, he's not coming out, Palpatine's not coming directly out and saying, oh, I'm a Sith Lord, I can teach you the ways of the dark side of the Force. Yes. He knows that'll never work at this point.
Right.
So he's simply saying, hey, there's way more to the Force than what you've been told.
Right.
And it kind of opens up this door that maybe Anakin hadn't fully considered pursuing at this point.
He's not wrong.
No,
again,
he's
we're
not
going to get
wrong.
into Sith Jedi, Sith versus Jedi. Again, different conversation, but he's not wrong. Going back to when Anakin is put on the council, one thing the book goes a little more detail into is that the council accepts it and hoping to use Anakin as a spy against Palpatine, right? So they're trying to play both sides off of each other.
Yes,
okay?
Definitely.
Anakin, obviously having a bond grown with Palpatine, doesn't like this. He feels uncomfortable. He feels like he's betraying Chancellor Palpatine, who's been there for him really for day one, has basically helped push him along and up the ranks, doesn't want to do it. Obi-Wan helps convince him to, at least in the book form, and then regrets it later. This becomes a big issue that the Jedi Council is starting to lose Anakin is starting to distrust the Council. He is not granted Jedi Knight status, which he really is angered and feels he's very insulted by.
Yeah.
Is he right to be?
Yeah, I believe so, because at that point, I think it's the rank of master that they're looking to bestow on him. So he's been, I believe, knighted at this point. He's essentially viewing himself as, almost a peer, certainly of Obi-Wan. We've talked previously about that kind of brotherly relationship that they seem to have as well. So yeah, Anakin's probably furious at this. And I imagine he's weighing everything he's done up to this point, his achievements, thinking that this is probably a slam dunk for him, and then they're like, nope, not today.
Obi-Wan gets knighted after killing a Sith. I mean, you can make the argument that Dooku's a Sith by the time he's killed. Anakin kills him, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, the things that are taken care of. I mean, he's fighting in the war. He's saving the day. He's rescuing Palpatine at the time, which nobody knows he's a Sith, right? I mean, he's doing all these accomplishments, and then he's being belittled because, to be fair, the Council from day one never trusted him.
Yeah.
Now, still trained him, still gave him full access to everything, just never, went that far.
Yeah, that's true. And I think this is circling back to that initial distrust. That's a great point to bring up. It's very clear here that he's a Jedi Knight. They're still not on board with how this has gone, I don't think.
So we're going to push forward here a little bit to the point where basically at the time we said that Anakin was getting these visions of Padme being killed. Basically it comes out that he basically does tell Anakin he is Darth Sidious, that he is a Sith Lord. He finally admits to it. Anakin runs back, tells the Council. The Council shows up, Windu, a couple people that clearly get dispatched right away.
Yeah.
And they try to arrest, Chancellor Palpatine. Mm-hmm. After we do this discussion on this fight, I want to get into this idea of the Jedi Council overthrowing a democratically elected leader. Okay? So the point of the fight is Windu basically gets, the Emperor knocked down, or Emperor Palpatine knocked down to the point where he can basically kill him, right? Anakin runs in. He basically says, Windu says, I need to kill him. Anakin says, no, don't kill him. I need him alive. Mm-hmm. Windu goes to basically strike him. Anakin cuts off his arm. Palpatine shoots lightning at him, knocks him out of the window. Mm-hmm. Palpatine basically christens him Darth Vader, turns him to the dark side because he can save Padme. Few things here. Why doesn't Windu just arrest him?
At the point where he has him by the end of that combat sequence, I'm assuming is what you're referring to. Yeah.
Why go away from the Jedi way?
I think Mace Windu at that point recognizes the threat for what it is. I think Mace Windu possibly is frustrated at his own inaction. I'm reading maybe a little bit too much into this, but it's been Windu throughout previous movies as well, who was kind of a foil to Qui-Gon a bit, and Obi-Wan kind of denying the rise of the Sith. He realizes that the Sith are in fact here. Obviously, Palpatine's evil. I'm not trying to argue against that. Palpatine's a terrible, terrible person, so Mace Windu, I think, also just wants on that level to rid the galaxy of a very powerful Sith user who is a sworn enemy, of course, of his order. So there's also that aspect of it as well.
So here's the point. Let me ask you this. So if Windu says, yep, let's arrest him, do we have Darth Vader?
No. I don't think so.
I mean, is that everything? I mean, are we talking about everything can be boiled down to just decisions that the Republic makes versus decisions that the Jedi make here? That if the Jedi just stuck to their way, things would have been okay. If they stayed true to their order and their rules, this wouldn't be an issue.
I think, it's interesting to analyze it that way, because if they had, stayed true to their way, just as you're mentioning, if they had been a little bit more open to the idea of following the evidence when it was presented,
or at least investigating
things a little bit further, I don't think things would have arrived at this point the way that they did. So I know I said no immediately. Would Anakin have become Darth Vader if Palpatine was arrested? That's kind of the point right there where things go south, where it's...
And who knows what a Sith Lord in prison looks like, right?
Yeah, that's not...
how do you take
I don't think we can even compare anything to that.
How do we take his ability to use the Force away, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so basically, Anakin gets christened Darth Vader. So now comes Order 66.
Yeah.
Okay. So Palpatine executes Order 66 that were chips implanted in the clone army as a way for them to not be able to override this command to basically turn on the Jedi, and they basically just start massacring them.
Yeah.
Now, Yoda shows up, or sorry, we're going to get ahead of ourselves. Darth Vader goes to the Jedi Council, or the Jedi Temple, kills all the children, right?
Mm-hmm.
Goes to Padme and talks about living life together and how things are going to be great and how they're finally going to be able to rule the galaxy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, it's a messed up series of events.
Weird scene, right?
Yeah.
Okay. The next thing, though, is Yoda and Obi-Wan basically come together with Bail Organa. They basically realize that Anakin is Darth Vader, or he's now turned to the dark side.
Mm-hmm.
They go to confront the people they go to confront, right? Yoda goes to confront the Emperor. Obi-Wan goes to confront Anakin.
Mm-hmm.
Yoda ends up fighting with Palpatine. I will say the one thing that's cool about Yoda fighting when he walks in and he just uses the Force and those guards flew against the wall. That was great.
Yeah, that's a great
Again,
part.
the sword fighting part I think is ridiculous, but how they made both these guys fight. Emperor basically wins this fight. It's a stalemate. Yoda ends up going into hiding. We know where he goes, right?
Mm-hmm.
He goes to Dagobah. He goes, right? Okay. Palpatine uses this as a way to basically acknowledge to the Senate that the Jedi Council are the real criminals here and that they tried to assassinate him and they tried to overthrow a democratically elected leader, which, to be fair, he is appointed by a republic, right? He's voted in from a senator to the chancellor. He's granted emergency powers as basically supreme chancellor. I understand the greatness of him being a Sith. Like, get it. And going behind the scenes here. Do we care that a Jedi Council that doesn't have to answer to anybody, who have these powers that they have that are extremely dangerous if you're not a Force user? If you're just an average person, a Jedi is extremely dangerous to you.
Oh,
right?
Absolutely.
I mean,
yeah.
To you can't tell the difference between a Sith and a Jedi, right? So here's this council that basically tries to overthrow the elected government. I don't know. I mean, what are your thoughts on this? Like, obviously, we know in the argument of Star Wars good and evil, clearly the evil Sith and the good Jedi, but the Jedi really are trying to do something that. What if they killed him? What would they do? Let me ask this way: had they killed Palpatine, do they just hold another vote, or do they appoint somebody to be Chancellor of the Republic?
That's a great question, because looking at it through probably most people in the galaxy, their knowledge of Sith and Jedi probably isn't outstanding. They probably don't have a great grasp of this.
They probably don't know what a Sith is.
Probably not, yeah. And by the time we arrive to that point, for a Jedi to try to have to say, oh, he was actually a Sith Lord in hiding and go through that, they probably wouldn't even have that conversation. They'd probably been like, Palpatine's dead, moving on.
Right.
They probably would have not tried to even explain the whole Sith behind it. But yeah, I think ideally they probably would have still gone through an election. To answer your question,
so they would have a democratic elected government.
But yes, I think they would have gone through a vote. I do not think the Jedi would have pushed to just appoint one of their own to that position. I don't think they would have done that.
So now, Yoda's, he's not in hiding yet, but he's going to go into hiding.
Right.
So now, basically, Darth Vader gets sent to Mustafar. He basically assassinates all the Federation leaders.
Yep.
Ends the conflict, right?
Yeah.
He goes there and kills them all.
There.
Okay. Obi-Wan shows up, brings Padme with him. Kind of a cheap trick, in a way, right? To confront Anakin. Anakin offers to Padme that he can kill Palpatine, that they can rule this galaxy together. It is very interesting because it's very similar to Darth Vader and Luke Skywalker.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
If you break Anakin down, Anakin is going to the people he loves. He is not trying to be Darth Vader that we know of Darth Vader, right? The Darth Vader that we know, he's not trying to be that person. He's first and foremost trying to save Padme's life, and everything he's done up to this point is to save her life. Mm-hmm. He believes Palpatine is the only person willing to help him. So he is trying to keep Palpatine alive. Outside of him saving Padme, I don't believe he has any loyalty to Palpatine. I think if Palpatine would have been able to save Padme, or quote-unquote save Padme, Anakin could kill him. I don't think Anakin has a loyalty to Palpatine beyond that. I think he acknowledges that if Padme would have said, yes, let's rule this galaxy together, I think he would have done it. Instead, she says no. And Anakin goes, well, I just killed all these kids for you. Right? I mean, he doesn't say it, but like he's probably thinking that.
Yeah, he's done all these horrible things to get to this point.
Yes, and she just says, no, you're breaking my heart, and he force chokes her. Right?
Yep.
Okay. Puts her unconscious. He turns to Obi-Wan, and he blames Obi-Wan for that. And then he tells Obi-Wan, you're either with me or against me. Doesn't offer him to be necessarily like an equal member of this group, right? To rule the galaxy. Just don't be in my way, right? Mm-hmm. And they have their amazing duel. One of the best lightsaber battles, a very long lightsaber battle.
It is a lengthy one, yeah.
Obviously, we know Obi had the high ground.
That's yes.
Anakin didn't.
Always take the high ground. Right. Yes, that's what I take away from Revenge of the Sith.
So basically, what happens is he gets burned up after he gets cut up. He gets cut up. He gets burned up. Palpatine finds him, turns him into Vader. Next thing you see Vader basically knows that Padme has died. Palpatine says that he had killed him. He had killed her. Convinces Darth Vader that he killed Padme. Obviously, he does that horrible yell at the end. Really bad. Really bad way to end the movie.
Yeah.
Reality was, Padme gives birth to Luke and Leia. Dies in birth, right? Mm-hmm. So Yoda and Obi-Wan now, knowing who these two are, knowing what's happening out there, the fact that their Jedi Order is decimated through Order 66, that basically the Republic of the Old is now done, that this Empire exists, that Palpatine is clearly in charge, that Darth Vader is clearly in power, they go into hiding. Yoda goes off to Dagobah. Who knows what he's doing? Obviously, we know he's going to try to talk to Qui-Gon Jinn, right?
That's right.
Right. We'll get to that. Yep. Leia goes to be adopted by Bail Organa and goes off to Alderaan, where she'll be raised to be a Princess Leia, and she'll be a leader in the Resistance. Obi-Wan takes Luke back to Tatooine, and it's a place where some people have argued that Vader would never show back up there because that's Anakin. Like, he doesn't want to be Anakin anymore. He's not Anakin. He's Darth Vader. Mm-hmm. The notion of stepping foot on Tatooine isn't something he wants to do. So the best place to put Luke is back with his family, and Obi-Wan will just watch over him. My question to you is it smart they went to hiding, or does what follow next, again, fall into their lap?
At this point, with how things have played out against them, I do think it's smart for them to go into hiding to regroup, but that's, of course, not really how it pans out.
Okay.
I would have liked to have seen them do something more direct, because ultimately, of course, Jedi being a force for good, generally speaking, it would have been nice to see them kind of regroup and try to lead their own kind of rebellion against Palpatine, who they know is now still in power. Sure. But yeah, how they deal with it, of course, in the immediacy of their situation is they go and they just kind of hide away. So I get Obi-Wan in terms of probably wanting to keep tabs on Luke, who is the son, of course, of a very powerful Force user. Looking back, of course, on that, probably should have had someone. Now, Bail Organa, I think, is very capable of doing that as well, but keeping tabs on Leia, who, in theory, would also have been a very powerful Force user. So.
Okay, so as we move into A New Hope, we're gonna try to switch gears here. Going from A New Hope to Return of the Jedi, we're not going to debate. There's no government to debate, right? The government exists. There's no transition. It's just the Empire.
It's the Empire. So now the rebellion is going against the Empire.
Right. So now the Empire exists. The rebellion is springing up by people who don't want to fall to their authority. So the question I want to have is really a debate: does the Empire get a bad rap here? So we know that from the beginning of A New Hope, they basically, what does they say? They liquidate the Senate. They basically get rid of the Senate, and basically, it was a puppet Senate probably. Anyways, by that time, Palpatine basically has unlimited authority here. Mm-hmm. Right?
Yep.
Okay.
It's when the true Empire kind of
right.
comes into play. He doesn't have to answer to anybody
right.
at that
Full
point.
dictator.
So,
they have a new battle station that is the Death Star that we know of. So what I mean by, do they get a bad rap? Like, if we were to look at this from the perspective of the rebellion, the Empire is a horrible, horrible authoritarian regime. Now let's look at it from the Empire here. What you have is a rebellion.
Mm-hmm.
How does any other government in the history of any kind of person, humankind, probably any kind, deal with a rebellion? They have to put the rebellion down.
Right.
Now, outside of destroying Alderaan, which, to be fair, was a rebellion hideout, right? Did have rebellion people from there, right? What did they do that was so bad?
Those are great questions, and as we've discussed before, I take, of course, the rebellion side on this.
Okay, so this is perfect.
Yeah, so overall, the series of atrocities that they actually commit. Now, I know this is where things get a little outside of the movie, which I know is something we touched on earlier, trying to stick to movie canon for what most viewers see, of course. But the atrocities are numerous. I mean, they're subjugating various planets. They are forcing various mining institutions to bend to their will. There's slavery. There is all kinds of weapons testing taking place. More specifically, the one that's portrayed in the films is Jeddah, of course, where they do the initial test of the Death Star from Rogue One. Okay. So they just wipe out that city on Jeddah there without even thinking about it, just so they can test their weapon. So there's a long-standing list of things that the Empire does that are atrocious.
Okay. So I'll buy your argument here. I'll buy your argument that the government does oppressive things. But let's take this argument and let's try to construct it to specifically rebellious purpose. Their treatment of the rebellion, do they get a bad rap? So think of it this way. Obviously, they blow up Alderaan. And again, I can't really sugarcoat that. That's pretty bad, right? But a squadron of people destroy a battle station the size of a moon, killing millions of people on board. And we acknowledge through somebody, canon somehow, I think they found the numbers like 1.7 million people were supposed to be on the Death Star, right? Contractors, right? Civilians, stormtroopers that were soldiers in the army, basically of the government. Mm-hmm. This terrorist force, right? Essentially, it has to be a terrorist force, blows up basically the key signature station, piece of artillery, military equipment that the government has. The government responds by basically invading through, basically Hoth, right? I mean, they'll catch up to him in Empire Strikes Back.
Right, yep. Okay? So they pursue. They try to.
Yep. And they start obviously constructing the second Death Star. What would you think that the Empire would do in response? Like how? I'm trying to think here. Like this. To be fair, the Republic is out. The Empire is the government.
Right. Oh yes.
So how else would any other government respond to essentially a terrorist organization? Right. One man's freedom fighters, one man's terrorists. So the rebellion to the Empire is a terrorist organization.
I think the biggest problem with their approach is their absolute total annihilation of anything they deem to be rebellious. So, sure, were there people associated with rebellion on Alderaan? Absolutely. They know the connection with Leia. They know Leia to be with the rebellion, or at least they heavily assume that at the very beginning of A New Hope. So, their response is to just destroy the whole planet. Like, that's something where they...
Hold on here. So, what you're saying is, because people were rebellious on Alderaan, that the Empire is basically associating all of Alderaan with the rebellion.
Arguably even worse, they're doing it to make a point.
Okay.
They're not even worried about rebellious factions on Alderaan, I don't think. They are trying to get Leia to cave.
Yep.
Their option to do that is to straight up destroy the planet.
So what does the rebellion think of the innocents on the Death Star? That they have associating with the Empire then, right? These are contractors. These are people building this machine. These guys probably aren't Empire people. They're probably just trying to collect a paycheck or not Republican credits, whatever Empire credits they have at the time, right? And go home, right? To whatever star system they live in. But if the people in Alderaan are associated and therefore seen as association, and vice versa, that the rebellion doesn't care about innocence here. Obviously we know Star Wars is a war. It is a conflict. Mm-hmm. do they have any difference of action here, right? I mean, the rebellion is extremely dangerous to the stability of the government, whereas the Death Star is extremely dangerous to the lives of people.
Right.
Okay? Right? So I'm conflating one that they are both threats here, and they're both going to destroy each threat. So why is it that the Empire, outside of, well, Empire is just straight up bad, are they getting a bad rap as any government would operate? I mean, why would the benevolent Emperor give up his power for this rebellion? After all, they did try to kill him. Right?
True, from his perspective, and that's certainly what he's saying too.
Well, it's not just his perspective. They did try to kill him.
Well, true. But he himself also knows his own agenda and how, of course. I mean, I know the breakdown of the whole argument is Star Wars being meant to be viewed as light side versus dark side. There's true good, there's true evil. And once you start adding in the gray areas, that's where we have this kind of interesting debate about these things.
Perfect.
To circle back to your Death Star question and whether or not there are innocent lives, of course, on the Death Star, I think from a rebellion standpoint, they're still viewing that as a military target versus a civilian target.
Okay.
So they are treating it as such.
Okay.
I think if the rebellion truly thought that the loss of life on even though the Death Star is this horrible machine capable of destroying planets, I think if the rebellion had cause to believe that there were a bunch of truly innocent people on board, not associated with the Empire's military, I mean, maybe they would have taken a different course of action.
True, but let's be
fair
knows? Here, right? Let's look at the leaders of the rebellion, right? The symbolic leaders, right? Princess Leia.
Yep.
Okay. Luke Skywalker, who is a Jedi, who Jedi attempt to overthrow the elected government in the previous, iterations of the story.
So you're saying there's a trend there.
Yes. Han Solo, who is a smuggler, right? The John Hancock of Star Wars, right? These are symbolic people. Like, these aren't people you should be happy to be. Like, if you're a person living in the the Imperial Empire, these aren't people to look up to. Maybe the Empire should have ran a better propaganda campaign to point out these differences of this rebellion. I just think that at the end of the day, you can make the argument that the Emperor or the Empire, they were rebel scum. I mean,
definitely how they're looking at it.
Yes,
yeah,
but I feel like you can make the argument that they are justified in that argument. I mean, hey, to be fair, the Republic had their way. The Senate had their way. The Jedi had their way. They had a long time. They had 1,000 years without Sith. They failed, right? It's the Empire's time to rule. Okay, so we'll go past that. We know, going through Empire Strikes Back, Return of the Jedi, we know the Emperor dies, or we assume he dies. We acknowledge we've never seen his body, right? So we don't know if he's really dead or not.
Yeah,
we just assume he's dead.
Gets thrown down the shaft in the Death Star there, and
Right, so we know Vader obviously dies. We know that the Death Star blows up, thanks to Lando. Anyways, what is it? What's the timeline? 30 years later?
Oh, approximately, yeah.
Approximately 30 years later,
Empire, after that, it's about 5 years when the Empire's truly crushed over Jakku. So about roughly, I believe, 5 years after the second Death Star is destroyed. And so fast forward from there, it's probably like 34, 35 years.
Okay, so tell us what the scene is now, 30 years from now.
Yeah, so fast forwarding to there, of course, we have the introduction of the newer films in the canon, where you have this new republic that has been formed as a way to try to, in a lot of ways, replicate what that original republic, the old republic now, would have been like. They're striving for those ideals. In the wake of that, of course, you have had this essentially Empire 2.0 rise up as well, I believe, comprised of which are certainly former Imperial officials. They're rebuilding their army of stormtroopers, and this is where you have the emergence of the First Order, who respond to this newly formed republic by not just blowing up one planet, but by annihilating multiple planets.
Sure.
So that kind of leads into the primary source of conflict for the overthrow of government at that point.
Okay, so obviously, and it's non-canon, or it is canon, but it's not shown in the films. I believe it's still canon. I guess I don't know if it exists in the extended universe or not yet, or the Legends of Star Wars. Their Senate gets recreated post-Jedi. Mm-hmm. You have a group of centrists who do make the argument for having a strong central government, right? I mean, let's be fair. When people are taken care of under a government and they're provided for, they want that protection still. Mm-hmm. So they're arguing, these centrists are arguing to keep this empire essentially intact. You have the resistance or these other people like Leia who are arguing against that, right? That they acknowledge we just blew this up. Why would we recreate it? Why do we want this in place? People out her as Darth Vader's daughter, right? Which was a secret to a lot of people. So when she is outed as Darth Vader's daughter on the Senate floor, she loses a lot of support. So she ends up breaking off with these leaders and becomes the resistance. And the new order, basically, or the First Order.
First Order, yep.
They're basically licking wounds, and they're basically rebuilding, and they're basically on the outer realm, gaining allies until they are more powerful, essentially, again, than the resistance. Mm-hmm. And what do? They blow up the 5 planets of the resistance. How is it are they just inept? Is this rebellion? I mean, just to repeat these things here.
Right, yeah.
I mean,
Star Wars is very circular in its order of events. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. So we end up with this First Order, and we don't really know. What we don't know at this point is how strong is the resistance. What we do, it's basically decimated. But before it gets decimated, we don't know what its reach is. Mm-hmm. We don't really even have any ways to gauge how strong the First Order is.
Yeah,
we don't know.
We don't have much. They kind of throw us into the middle of that conflict,
right,
without much context at that point. Yeah,
we do know that there's a Kylo Ren. We do know it's Ben Solo, which we're not going to get into much of that. Like I said, we're trying to keep this a government discussion, not really too much the story arc of each movie. We know that basically the 5 planets of the Resistance get blown up. So where we go to now, or where we exist, I guess we'll just fast forward to where we exist now. Obviously that the First Order is taking over. Mm-hmm. We don't know how long the next between 8 and 9 will be.
Correct. Yep.
We assume it's going to be a few years. Mm-hmm. At what point do we think that the First Order, do we feel like the First Order is back to Empire standards, or do we feel like it's gaining that?
I think it's probably still gaining that.
Okay.
If we were to do a bigger time jump, and this is purely speculative at this point anyway, of course, but if there's going to be a bigger time jump, yeah, maybe they've fully been able to instate their power and their reign over the galaxy. I think we're going to meet a First Order that is still pushing for more power, though, at this point.
Sure.
By episode 9. I think we're going to be seeing a First Order that's still doing that, and of course a Resistance that has been nearly decimated.
Sure.
I mean, they're fleeing in what supposedly is the final Resistance shuttle with this tiny group of people.
Yeah.
So a big part, I imagine, is them also gaining power, like gaining followers, I should say, to fight back against the First Order.
Right.
So.
Okay. Now, one thing I want to bring up before we end here is, so Nate, our other co-host, unfortunately wasn't with us tonight. He's under the weather. He brought up 2 really good points I want to talk about. He's brought up power versus authority, and it's the Empire versus Republic. He talked about how the Empire has all of the power, but really no direction other than what the Emperor wants, right? That's the direction. Like, we're going left, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas, to counteract that, the Republic has all the authority, but has no military to actually engage it. Obviously, everything's always the best of both worlds. Is there a way in which, not necessarily Palpatine, but that this Republic does have a standing army and is able to be a benevolent Republican government in this galaxy? Does that exist?
Right. And thus far, we haven't really seen it, at least with the addition of your comment with the standing army.
Correct.
For the longest time, once the Republic was actually, and this is going back to that prequel trilogy, there wasn't the standing army, of course, at that point in time. So we haven't seen that, I don't think, at this point in Star Wars. So,
but we would probably acknowledge with the lack of Jedi that exists now, a standing army would probably be needed.
Yes.
Okay, so we both agree to that. Now, he brought up a quote from the Batman trilogy about Harvey Dent, right?
Okay, yeah.
He says, you either die a hero or you live long enough to see yourself become the villain, right? And that Rachel Dawes was the last man who appointed to protect the Republic was named Caesar. And he never gave up his power. The idea of granting emergency powers to an emperor or a Palpatine or a Sith, whatever you want to do it, right, obviously has its issues. One thing we can say is that people were protected, right? That prior to Palpatine, the Republic itself, though, to be fair, wasn't defending other planets. It
were not
wasn't
necessarily
able to defend people. That they were being invaded and blockaded by the Trade Federation, the Banking Clan, the Techno Droid Union, and they were able to basically, put them into submission. So to end this, I want to ask you, do you think that it's the Republicans' ineptitude, or is it more Palpatine's cunningness that leads us from Old Republic to Empire?
Mm-hmm.
Who's more to blame?
Who's more to blame for that? I would honestly probably say the Republic at that point.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, let's be fair. Like, we've acknowledged there's certain parts where it's like, if they just simply changed one or two things or kept to their normal operating procedure, do they lock in Palpatine? What drastic move does he have to take? If they don't vote no confidence, what do? How about if they don't put Jar Jar Binks in charge? Right? How about if they never train Anakin? Likely, just again, we talked about this. Yoda trains Luke. Luke is older than Anakin was.
Yeah.
Luke has fear. This idea of training Skywalkers that they clearly don't want to train, and they train them anyways, right? Well, they get what they deserve with that. I want to thank you guys for listening tonight. Go out to iTunes, give us a rating, 5 stars. Please leave us a review. If you have comments or questions, you can email us at aliensandcowboys.com. aliensandcowboys@gmail.com. You can hit us up on Twitter at alienandcowboy. We put a poll up last week. So our first episode, Convening Back, will be a debate between the games of Halo 2 and GoldenEye. I'm a huge GoldenEye fan, so I'm going to take that part. Between you and Nate, one of you will take Halo 2, and the other person is going to moderate this debate, and we're going to say which game had a bigger impact and was more important. And we're going to do a special kind of bonus episode after this show. We're going to do a Christmas kind of debate on the movie Die Hard. Obviously, everybody's, or most, I guess not most people's favorite Christmas movie.
Not most people,
due to recent polls,
as we have discovered. So this will be interesting.
And we'll debate, and we're going to explain why Die Hard is a Christmas movie.
Absolutely.
But again, like I said, give us a review, give us a follow, tell your friends, go ahead and retweet us out. We enjoy you guys listening, and we hope to bring more information to you, more debates, more discussions. Joe, do you have anything else?
No, I think that's perfect. Appreciate y'all for listening, and definitely, as Garrett mentioned, go out there, give us a listen, recommend your friends.
Sounds good. Have a good night, guys. Cheers.